I'm on. Thank you. All right. We'll go ahead and begin with the public hearings, starting with RZ 2019-01, which is a proposal for rezoning. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could have the computer, please. Before you all this evening is a proposed rezoning for 28 acres of land. This is a city-initiated rezoning. It is for the Greenbrier Shopping Center, the Westwood Shopping Center, and the shops at Westwood. The purpose of this rezoning is to complete the implementation of part of the Area 3 small area plan. In March of 2018, the City Council adopted the plan. That was the first implementation step, and that established this map that you see on the right that included the T5C transect. And the T5C transect is this purple color here. After a couple of months of work with the Plan Commission City Council, the next implementation step occurred in January when the City Council adopted a new form-based code for the Commercial Highway Zoning District. And that form-based code takes the old system of separating uses and basing land use around a system of connections to the highway system and requires now a integrated mixed-use set of standards when and only when residential use is introduced into these centers based around streets and blocks, formal open spaces like squares, parks, and plazas. This rezoning is the final implementation step. It will bring the remaining 28 acres. So this is all of T5C. It's 100 plus acres currently that these rules already apply to because it's zoned CH. What you see outlined in red are the subject properties of the rezoning. They are zoned commercial shopping center. So those rules do not yet apply. And the purpose of this rezoning is to finish that implementation and bring these into conformance with that plan. This was envisioned in the plan, and this slide is the last page of the Area 3 Small Area Plan. It has an interesting page number now, which is 11.3.15 in your comprehensive plan, which is the implementation matrix for the Area 3 plan. This is what you see. It is an immediate priority to apply this zoning district uniformly across the district. Here's a map showing the properties, listing the properties that this rezoning will apply to. You can see the properties here on the zoning map outlined in cyan. The Westwood Shopping Center is here where my arrow is pointing, consisting of 8 acres. The shops of Westwood is here, and maybe I'll go through the buildings. This is the old Lone Star, going back to Harbor Freight, going over to Staples. That's the Westwood Shopping Center. The shops at Westwood is a newer strip retail center that has some office tenants in it, like a Century 21. Then you go across the street. This area is the Greenbrier Shopping Center. The Autolite Service Center is here on the map along Altoona Drive. And then you go along Big Lots over to where the crab place is in the old car wash. Those are the properties that are under consideration for rezoning this evening. The proposed rezoning, the purpose of it is to implement the new form-based code when residential uses are developed. So that's a positive. Also, the rezoning, while it won't change any of the standards, development standards associated with non-residential, there are some differences in terms of the bulk standards. The minimum lot area is a little smaller. It's 20,000 instead of 40,000 square feet. Similarly, the lot width is a little bit smaller. It's 150 instead of 200. The setbacks are a little bit smaller, 25, 15, and 20. Those all apply internal to the property. What's important is this setback from residential PDR or CT. It remains the same and has the same requirement. So that was what we wanted to make sure was consistent. The open space is consistent as well. There are a difference in uses. There are more commercial and community type uses that are permitted under the commercial highway zoning district. And there are also some uses like elementary schools and golf courses that are permitted by right in CSC that will no longer be permitted by right in CH. The schools would take an SUP and the golf courses wouldn't be permitted. After reviewing this, this is something we've been working on with you guys for some time now. The purpose of this rezoning is to finish that implementation of the Area 3 plan. And the main issue is making sure that those form-based code standards apply before we get any residential requests in that zoning district. That's of some importance to us. That change will be positive. And the other changes, the change of the bulk standards and the additional permitted uses won't have any negative impacts on the quality of life of surrounding neighborhoods or on the economic success of the existing commercial uses. And that was a big deal as well with this rezoning. We want these shopping centers to remain viable if that's the proper land use. We don't want to in any way inhibit that, and this rezoning has been designed, the zoning ordinance was designed to prevent that. So we do recommend approval of the rezoning of the city council, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
All right, Mr. Hornick.
Thank you, Mike. I got a question. You kind of alluded to making the change before residential uses were potentially pursued in the commercial shopping center district. What is the by right commercial shopping district? What are the by right uses that you can do in that district today?
Multifamily townhomes,
At what density?
12 units an acre.
So by rezoning those, that would then make any residential uses subject to the new form-based code standard, because anyone that wanted to pursue those after the rezoning would then have to go through a process whereby they would have to comply in order to get those residential uses. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Would they not be grandfathered in, or is there any concern over grandfathering?
No, sir. There haven't been any proffered rezonings or special use permits for that type of use on any of these parcels, so there's no vested right.
And then what would the new density be under CH for those same properties?
By right, it's 12 units an acre, so there's no by right change. This does permit, the change to CH does include the ability by special use permit to go up to 24. That would have to come back before you all and to the city council.
Okay, thank you.
Bates.
Yes, I was wondering whether or not any developers have been approaching the city about developing any of these properties as residential.
Yes, sir. We have received phone calls about some of these properties for residential use. We have not received any plans or anything that went to like a TRC, but we have had inquiries on, I think there's 5 parcels on 4 of them.
Right. And from my experience, I've seen very few occasions, certainly not over 3 or 4 in the last 15 or 20 years, where the city itself has initiated the rezoning of property for more intensive use without an applicant coming in. Is that right?
I haven't done that research.
Well, I can tell you that in years past, that was virtually never done. And the reason is that by waiting for a developer to come in and suggest a rezoning, propose a rezoning to a more intensive use, which this would certainly be for residential, then that enables the city to sit down and have discussions with the developer and to entertain proffers that may be voluntarily offered by a developer. This would go out the window with this rezoning, wouldn't it?
Well, and we kind of talked about this a little bit today. The era of negotiating proffers is different now. We don't have a good dialogue or the ability to have a good dialogue, and there's issues with proffers as well. They're applied, they're not applied uniformly. Let's see if I can say this the correct way. If there are impacts from a proposed use under this plan, then they can still be mitigated through conditions in an SUP process.
But isn't a special use permit only limited to conditions related specifically on site?
No, it's the impact of the proposal, impact of the land use. So, for instance, if there was a school capacity issue, you could deny that special use permit.
I don't think you could put a condition on a special use permit to make a contribution towards schools.
We've had that before. The Summerfield special use permit was approved with the cash contribution per unit for schools.
And we can only do rezoning proffers now because of site-related issues. The difference between a rezoning proffer and a special use condition are now virtually, are none. There's really no difference.
It's my understanding that the limitations on proffers has recently been changed by the General Assembly, and I think it's probably going to make localities more able to entertain proffers.
But the special use process achieves the exact same outcome.
I don't think so. Oh, that's all I have.
And I would also add, to answer your first question, Mr. Pates, no, the city has not initiated this kind of rezoning, but this kind of rezoning is a result of our special area planning process, our small area planning process. And this is something new for the city. And as we go through each of the areas, we do anticipate proposing rezonings for each of the areas to have the zoning and the property conform with the policies that have been adopted through the comprehensive plan amendments of the small area plans.
Mr. Durham.
Can you talk to the effect of the form-based code that they would have and their relationship to the sorts of negotiations you may have been able to obtain via proffer or other process in the past? Does form-based code essentially change that equation?
Yeah, it puts us, it requires what we used to have to negotiate for, which is the kind of development that lends itself to walkable urban places where people aren't solely dependent on their car. The implementation of formal open spaces for the recreational areas that are now required to be structured within the development is a real positive effect. The transitional zones from the proposed development now that would be required to existing neighborhoods is a new requirement that would control height and building width in a way that we would have to negotiate and hope for with the proffer process. So in some ways, this is checking more boxes than that system would currently.
Thank you.
Anything further? I would like to acknowledge that we do have Renee Rodriguez on the line. So, Mr. Rodriguez, do you have anything?
I can't hear you very well, but I don't have any comments, sir.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, one follow-up. So what I thought I heard when, follow-up on my question, when I asked, the density, by making this change, there is no additional by right residential density that would be granted to these properties. Instead, there would be more requirements in order to be able to do those by right. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The form-based code applies for the by right and if they come back for special use, a
Yes, sir.
permit to double, yes?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Anything further? All right, this is a public hearing this evening, so I would now open it up to anyone here to talk on this subject. Please state your name, address, and adhere to the time aspects. Anyone? Seeing no motion or movement, hearing none. Okay, that closes the public hearing. So at this particular time, any further discussion?
We don't have a motion.
Oh, that's right, we do. So can I entertain a motion on this particular topic? Thank you, Mr. Pates.
I move that we approve a rezoning of the 4 GPINs noted in the memo from CSC to CH.
All right, I have a motion, I have a second for Mr. Rodriguez. Discussion. Mr. Pates. Mr. Hornet, go ahead.
I'm not entirely comfortable moving forward tonight because I don't know that we've had enough discussion on it. I'm comfortable with the residential change because I think you do have to go through an additional process in order to get that, and I think there are actually more protections in this. I think there may be, through the special use permit process, ability to get a higher density that we may not necessarily want, but that is in the control of the the planning commission and the city council. One of the things I am a little concerned about are some of the permitted in CH uses other than residential, in particular vehicle service, vehicle sales and rental. I think we have a lot of underutilized properties that become car lots. And if I owned one of those properties and I was looking for a way to generate some money and I had some surplus parking, it's fairly easy to let somebody put up a sign and start selling cars out there. I don't think that's necessarily what we want, so I have a little bit of concern. I don't know if there's if we have any ability or if there's anything that could be proposed that would potentially limit that or look at amending the CH in the future to make it a SUP. Because those are, kennels. I don't know if anybody has a kennel anymore. Vehicle service, vehicle repair, passenger terminals. I know we've got Fred Bus, it's a passenger terminal, but it's a very specialized use. So that would be an area of concern, not necessarily on the residential, but on some of those other uses that we may be accidentally allowing throughout these shopping centers in an interim time.
Just to comment on that, Mr. Hornung, we are in the process of starting the process of crafting the specifics for the Maker District rezoning, new element, and eventually rezoning the Princess Anne Quarter, and that's one of the issues that we've had discussions about. And I think at this point we're anxious to sort of get input from you all, but I think our initial thinking is maybe those uses do shift to a special use category, and as we come further along that line, I think we would probably make it consistent with the highway commercial as well.
But in the interim, if this were to go through, we
True.
could potentially be exposed to that.
So you would be looking for some type of language change?
I don't know how it's done in a rezoning. I don't think you can do that. I think you have to do that with the CH. I don't think you can impose the city can impose conditions on property as part of a rezoning. A blanket city, they can simply rezone it, but the city can't say it's rezoned, but you can't do X, Y, and Z.
You can certainly request staff to move forward on that kind of an amendment. We'll discuss it with council and take it along through the process.
I think I'd be more comfortable being involved in that, so.
I mean, well, obviously, yes, it would be coming
Yeah.
to the.
I mean, in general, I'm supportive of it, but I think if it were to go through tonight, I would not be supportive of moving it forward. I'd like to have that discussion with the planning commission, a little bit more in depth about those uses and what, maybe putting it together with an amendment to the CH. I know that's time, but I think that's the appropriate way to move forward with it.
Mr. Pates?
Yes. I think this ordinance is a move in the wrong direction. I realize that there is a desire to facilitate the redevelopment of aging shopping centers, and part of that was to be accomplished through the potential to get extra residential density in these areas that are now strictly commercial. And I voted for that ordinance change to allow that potential. But there's several reasons I am against this proposed ordinance. First, it's philosophical, that I just don't generally think it's a good idea for people to upzone people's property on the city's own initiative and essentially giving people additional development rights. I think the process works much better where applicants come in on an individual property basis and we can consider those. It enables the Planning Commission and the council to scrutinize each application, each site, for its unique characteristics and the city's needs as to that property. By doing this, we are essentially telling the property owners for these, 28 acres, that we are not only allowing the 12 units to the acre that they have currently by right, okay, but that they are able to double that number by a special use permit. This ordinance would allow roughly, by special use permit, a total of 672 residential units on these 28 acres. Half of that number is allowed by right today, but this would open up the opportunities to have much greater residential development in areas that have traditionally been commercial. I think we need to, a second reason is I think that we need to discourage greater multifamily building in the city, which I'll talk more about later this evening. I disagree that you can get the same sort of conditions on a property through a SUP than you can through a rezoning. They're very different, and I think that this ordinance would decrease the city's leverage to get things that it needs, such as contributions towards schools. The schools have been a big topic recently, and I don't think we want to do anything to reduce the city's ability to get those. And last but not least, I think that this ordinance would cut, or largely cut the city council and the planning commission out of the process of this additional density. I realize that it would have to have a special use permit, but I think that is a much less onerous process for a developer than a rezoning. And the city has much more discretion, I think, in a rezoning context than in the SUP. So with that, I think we should just simply not do this ordinance and wait for projects to take shape and come back to us for this rezoning. Thank you.
Mr. Durham?
So isn't it the case with the current shopping center, commercial shopping center zoning that by right, we could have this 12 per acre right now with no rezoning application, with no form-based code application, with no review at all by anybody except for the typical reviews that the planning department does to ensure that developments are done in accordance with code, et cetera, right? I mean,
Yes,
we're
sir.
essentially, if we do nothing, we have zero leverage on a developer who wants to put in a residential development on these properties. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think Mr. Horning's point has merit, that there are some uses, by right uses, that potentially we should think about restricting in CH. And so I would like staff's opinion on holding off on this rezoning while you craft a change to the ordinance to change some of these uses to be required by special use permit. Can you talk to that?
If the identification of the primary concern is the vehicle sales and service, one option that you might want to consider but the larger rezoning your majority would feel comfortable with is to add a condition to the approval or a statement rather, or a request that asks City Council to initiate amendments to the highway commercial zoning, shifting the vehicle uses from the permitted category, the by right category, to the special use category. And as we take this forward to council, because we are in control of the timing of the process, we will then ask council at that point to initiate that amendment. And I don't know for certain, but I'm likely to think that they would probably be agreeable to that, and ask them, in part of your motion, is not ask them to take action on this rezoning until they had made that consideration and decide whether they wanted to initiate it.
Mr. Durham?
And I also like to associate myself with Mr. Pates's remarks about the costs associated with large-scale developments and the capital investment that should be going along with those. And so I'm not convinced that the city is got a system in place to anticipate such development, and then to obtain appropriate resources to accommodate the population increases that go along with it. So I think Mr. Pates makes a good point, although I'm a little leery of the He's correct that the law is changing with respect to proffers, but I'm not positive that the old way of doing business, where you're able to obtain proffers from developers for things, is going to come back the way it was. And even then, as Mr. Johnson noted, it was done without uniformity, and often put localities in positions where they were making deals that weren't really very well, suited to what the requirements actually were. They would trade land and say, hey, the developer gave us land for a future school. Well, great, that's the least expensive part of the whole thing, So anyhow, I think Mr. Pates makes a great point about that. I'm just not positive that the effect of rezoning this to CH is going to significantly limit or change the city's ability to address the potential school costs that would likely come with it.
When and if there is a special use request for a residential rezoning, or even a straightforward rezoning request that's associated with residential uses, we do go to some lengths to working with the applicant and working with the school system and working with the city financial staff to identify what the cost of that project would be, whether it's schools or other kind of public impacts, emergency services, et cetera. And in that process, you, the Planning Commission, will have ample opportunity to review those assumptions in that work. And so we have in the past had lengthy discussions about whether it was enough, and I anticipate, as it well should, that would occur in the future also. So I think that there will be ample opportunity to address impacts of whether it is through a rezoning or through a special use process to address those concerns, which I think everyone in the room agrees are valid and need to be appropriately dealt with.
Mr. Pates.
Yeah, I thank you, Dave, for your comments, but I'd like to go back to what Mr. Horning said a minute ago. Coming into this evening, I had not given any thought whatsoever to looking at the CH zoning district. Rather, I was looking at this application tonight to rezone it on the property on the city's initiative. I think he raises a very good point, and I would say that perhaps since we're talking about doing a wholesale rezoning of these properties, that perhaps we should look at the CH district overall and see whether some changes need to be there. I would personally like the idea of getting rid of all residential uses by right. And if you're going to have the 12 or 24 units, let that be by special use permit. I don't think that it makes sense for us to be having by right residential units in the middle of a shopping center. But I think it might make good sense for us to look at CH as a whole, because what Chris is talking about here would be a zoning citywide, would be in effect citywide for the whole CH district, which may be very appropriate. I hadn't even thought about the car repairs and sales and things. Maybe there are other uses there that we should take a closer look at. So I would support postponing a vote on this until we can look at the CH as a whole.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have an awkward situation. We do have a motion, I believe,
We do.
up. And I'm starting to get a feeling that the room is agreeing with Mr. Hornig that we may need to re-examine. So I'm just curious, where do we want to go from here?
But I guess my question would be, Mr. Hornick and staff, haven't we already visited this when we talked about the transects and we talked about the form-based code as we looked at it, I want to say 2-3 months ago, and we did talk about, how we have these communities and what we want to do within them, and residential was a part of it, along with commercial. So I'm just trying to figure out where do we think we want to now modify this based upon everybody's agreement with you
Well, my primary concern was those particular uses, those two that I mentioned on the car repair. I differ a little bit from Mr. Pates in that I don't really have an issue with aligning the CSC to the CH, which then aligns to our Transect plan. You know, so I don't have an issue with that. That's our plan, and I think we should go forward with that. I'm more concerned with the unintended consequences of doing that without first looking at the CH uses in there that we may end up getting. Because we're trying to find ways to encourage people to redevelop shopping centers, and that has to do with money. If it's more economical to build something, if it's more economical to build residential uses, they may do it. But if we're providing another avenue where someone might find another use that generates money, it may be the path of less resistance, and that's my concern. We've seen it pop up in a number of places in the CH already because it was too expensive to redevelop an old gas station, so it's a lot easier to have somebody sell cars there and pay you a certain amount per month. So that's my main concern, not making changes that are inconsistent with what our Transect says, but making sure that we're not opening up a door that may have consequences, because we don't know that City Council would approve a change to the CH. We can't go on that assumption that they would do it. They may, but we don't know that. I have faith they might, but we're making a decision now to make a recommendation. At a minimum, the recommendation should, in my opinion, should say something about making that change, but I'd be more comfortable delaying it and doing it all at once. I think it's.
But I mean, okay, so back to Mr.
So I would entertain a friendly, amendment to my motion, if you had one, Chris.
Well, but that's to Mr. Slominski's point, because I guess I'm trying to figure out, we are now looking at a modification to the motion, I think. But at the same token, I'm concerned because you just made a statement that says, I'd like to kind of get this all done up front, as opposed to, here's a motion. A modification says a recommendation or a request to council that we look at, some change in the zoning code there. I think that's where you're headed, at least for consideration on other uses.
Yeah, and it puts us in a tough spot because I know the timing of an ordinance amendment. I know how long it takes. It's got to go to City Council to initiate it. It comes to staff. So you're months and months of getting that done.
Do we put this on hold for that amount of time, given what's going on with the area plans and everything else, which that is the transects? So I'm just trying to figure out where is the meeting place for us without kind of putting this back here and taking a little bit of time.
What would the timing, if you were to, Chuck, if you were to project a request as part of this for us to ask City Council to initiate an ordinance amendment to the CH, what is the timing of that, and how much time do we have to deal with this particular case by statute?
Well, there are time limits established in the statute, but that normally is what is set up for when you have a private property owner applicant, and that applicant can always grant an extension. So the time limits are somewhat moot at this since the city is initiating it. But in terms of actual processing it, if you all made a motion tonight saying that you wish to take action on this proposed amendment, but you wish that council would consider shifting the auto-related uses from a permitted to a special use, we would have to take that back to the council at a work session and for a meeting, then action at an evening meeting. Because of the budget season, we've been instructed that there'd be no non-budget related items going before council until maybe May. So we probably wouldn't be able to get on their agenda to May to initiate that. And then that would come back to you all, and assuming they would do that probably then in June. So then we'd bring this back to you in June. So it would delay it from March to June. And then you'd be reconsidering this and then it would go forward, so.
Candidly, I don't know that waiting to June is, I don't know that we have something that is pressing us right now. I'd like to get it done to make sure that we comply, but I think the risk, I would prefer to have a substitute. I don't know if you can do a substitute to table, but mine would be to table it and to request that staff ask City Council as part of this to initiate an ordinance amendment to the CH to look at those uses and shift them to special uses. Those two in particular, the car, vehicle sales and vehicle service.
And I would second that motion.
Okay,
And they could be brought back together.
Right.
This ordinance plus a text amendment.
so let me make sure I'm clear as to what I'm hearing. So what I'm hearing is we have a motion out there, but the request now is not a modification, but
Substitute.
to substitute that motion, but you're saying table that.
No, the substitute motion is to table action
Right.
until we get,
little bit
and
more.
ask city council to initiate that process. If they come back and say they won't, then it'll come back to us sooner, I assume.
I would second that.
Already been.
Well, you don't need a second,
His substitution.
For a substitute, don't you? Maybe you don't need a second for a
I
substitute.
don't think so.
I can't remember.
This was a friendly.
Okay, that's where I was going. I was waiting for you to you accept. Okay, so basically, we have a substitute motion that's been accepted to table this until we go forward to ask council to do some things about what we're identifying for use.
I think that has to be seconded because somebody seconded my original motion, right?
Yes.
Okay, can I get a second? Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I have a second.
Second to second.
Okay. Okay. I think we're good with that one. Let's move on. Our second,
We have to
hello?
vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Whole lot going on here. Please cast your votes.
Yes, it's to table.
That's correct. That's to table it. Motion passes 7-0. Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is RZ 2019-02, Bridgewater Street LLC, another rezoning action.
May I have the
Staff.
computer, please? Thank you. Good evening. This is an application for a rezoning at 317 Bridgewater Street. The property is currently zoned commercial office transitional. The applicant, Tire Tread Services, is requesting a rezoning to commercial highway. The applicant wants to use this property to expand their business and to use the site for automotive service, a use which is not allowed in CT zoning, but which is allowed in CH zoning as a by right use. Staff recommends approval of the rezoning. The site had previously been used for automotive repair, and the rezoning would permit this use on the property and allow the expansion of an existing business, in this case, Tire Tread Services, who are located on an adjacent parcel. We have the property here outlined in red, and it is at the intersection of Charles and Bridgewater Streets. The structure, according to our GIS system, was built in 1949, which predates the current zoning ordinance. It is legally nonconforming to its current CT zoning regulations and will be legally nonconforming to CH zoning regulations if the rezoning is approved. It was used as an automotive services shop at least until the year 2004, and that use was replaced by a motorcycle repair shop in 2007, and then an auto and truck parts sale business in 2008. While the use of automotive service is not allowed in CT zoning, that use has historically and recently existed on this site. Surrounding properties are all zoned either commercial transitional or commercial highway. Tire Tread Services is located at 1311 Bridgewater. Located, as shown on this map, by the numbers 1 on these two parcels. So they're located here, and they would like to have this property to expand their business. The use of the site, which they have here at CH, allows for automotive service, and they want to expand to 317 Bridgewater. This would give them more vehicle base to work in, allow them to expand their customer base and have more vehicles to work on. Surrounding businesses include Huckleberry's, which is a furniture store. There's also offices for the RACSB located here, for the commercial across the street, and then residential adjacent to the site. The structure at 317 Bridgewater has been identified by staff as a character structure, that is, a building that contributes to the character of this neighborhood. Approval of the rezoning would permit the continued use of the structure for commercial ends as it has historically been used for. Furthermore, this area has been identified for revitalization efforts, including the adaptive reuse of existing structures. The property on the left, here is 311 Bridgewater. This is 317 Bridgewater. Tire Tread Services is currently located at 311, and this is the property seeking rezoning. The temporary storage of used tires, as seen here on 311 with this trailer, some tires out front. The temporary storage of this used tires is part of the automotive service use that the applicant runs. They have a trailer that's used for storing car tires that need to be disposed of. And every few weeks, this trailer is taken and it's filled and taken off site, then comes back empty when to be used again. If this rezoning is approved, the applicant would have more bays from the structure here at 317 to work on vehicles, as well as more room for tire storage, potentially inside the structure at 317, rather than stored outside. In conclusion, the applicant is requesting a rezoning of 317 Bridgewater Street from commercial transitional to commercial highway. They wish to use the site for automotive service and expand their adjacent business to this site. That use has historically existed on this site, and the rezoning would be in keeping with the commercial character of this block. Staff recommends approval of the rezoning. And the applicant's here this evening, so if you have any questions, staff and the applicant are available.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Commissioners, questions?
Anybody else?
All right, Mr. Pates.
Yes. I went by this week and looked at the site, and my biggest concern about this, obviously, I think it's good that this business is prospering and wants to expand, and we certainly don't want to discourage that. On the other hand, the current business, which I guess is what, 311 through 315 or something, Bridgewater, has had for a long time a detached trailer from a tractor trailer parked on the site, and I believe you had a picture of it, that is used on site to store tires. And outdoor storage is prohibited in this zoning district, or I think any zoning district, a commercial zoning district. And what you have here are tires that are being stored that are not in a building. I don't think it matters whether they're in a trailer or covered with a tarp or out in the open. It's not supposed to be part of a use like this. And I think that as we're trying to work hard to improve this portion of the city, which is also my own neighborhood, I think we want to try to make sure that these businesses and projects are a net plus for the neighborhood and not a negative. So I was wondering whether the staff thinks that there's anything that can be done about the existing storage.
If the tires were just left out there, if they weren't even within a trailer, if they were just left out there, I can see that being a nuisance. And if the trailer was left in a decrepit state, if it was not well maintained, falling apart, had flat tires, again, I can see how that would be a visual nuisance. By expanding their business to 317 Bridgewater, if this rezoning is approved, it would give them more space. They would get 3 additional car bays and more indoor storage. Potentially, they could keep tires in there rather than having to rely on a trailer on their current site. Now, the applicant's here this evening. He can tell you what they could do with storage. But we police these uses, these automobile service and sales uses, fairly tough because we understand that the visual blight and impact they can have on their surrounding neighborhood.
So are you saying that anybody who has a business in CT or CH districts can park a trailer on their property and store things in it?
No, sir. In this case, the storage of tires is an integral part of his business operation. It's what they do. They work on tires and replacements.
I think they're rotated though. Like they empty that trailer out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and let's go back to the computer. I think you're raising a really good point here, Mr. Pates, and we want to be pretty clear, especially with the applicant here and members of the public, as to what we would do on a use like this. So if you're looking at the pictures on the top and on the left, you see that there are tires outside. That's a zoning violation. So, and I'm bringing this up right now with everybody here. If this is recurring, if this wasn't just, well, we happened to see this outside today, we hadn't seen this condition like this before today, then we were going to write a notice of violation and require them to clean that up. If that trailer wasn't continuously being filled and removed, again, that's a zoning violation. So no one should structure their business based on having to have a trailer serve as kind of their storage facility that isn't functional, that doesn't move. But what I think James is getting at is that this is a rotational thing where that trailer is an actual vehicle, and they're filling it up, and then hooking it up and pulling it off site. And in that case, as long as it's maintained well, and there's not a line of them, as long as it remains in that one condition, and it's continuously pulled off the site, it's a little bit different than having this stuff stacked outside, which is a zoning violation and needs to be taken care of. And I'll point you to some other stuff on the right. There's a dumpster out there that's been there for a while. We've already talked with the applicant about that. That has to be cleaned up. Those are zoning violations. So those are things that certainly need to occur before we would approve any kind of certificate of zoning use for that new use. They got to clean up the tires. They've got to clean up the trailer, the dumpster. And if they had a trailer that was, like James said, an inoperable vehicle, that also would be a nuisance enforcement issue that we would handle. So trying to just be blunt about what we see when we look at it.
Well,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, our code talks about outdoor storage, and it defines outdoor storage as an area for the storage of goods that have a large size, mass, or volume, and are not easily moved or carried without the use of a mechanical lifting device. It doesn't say anything about what kind of form that the storage takes. And it seems to me that when you are storing things that are not in a building, that are not in a structure, that it would be considered outdoor storage. In fact, it was funny, just on the way here tonight, lo and behold, since I was thinking about this, I saw another site on Princess Anne Street that's had a trailer, detached trailer, parked on their lot for months and months. And I just cannot believe that we allow that or want that to occur. And I don't know whether there needs to be something done to our zoning ordinance or to talk to the city attorney, but it seems to me that with these kinds of projects and development, it's incumbent on the applicant to maintain their current property well. And I'm anxious to support this, and I want to ask the applicant if we can get some assurances on that trailer. But this looks to me like outdoor storage.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Well, I guess I got a question for Mr. Pates. Do you think that the expansion would lead to more of this outdoor storage? Do you think it actually would improve the?
Well, I would hope that maybe they could use this building if they have a room full of tires that need to be stored. That would be a good way to store them. There isn't much room here. I mean, I went around the site that
Sure, I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Both to the side and the rear of it, there isn't much room. So I understand it would be a problem on storing things.
Sure.
But I think they should be able to do it.
And so I have a couple more questions for staff. So can you help me? I believe there was a tenant in the use already, and they had to move out because they couldn't continue operations for what? Is that right? For that purpose, that wasn't zoned correctly either?
The current tenant, Restorations, Fredericksburg
Rappahannock Restoration?
Rappahannock Renovations, is a contractor office. They wanted to do fabrication at one point, came to us to say, we want to do fabrication in that building, and then buy it. And this is one of the things that led to the thought about the Maker District, was that that's not permitted. And that seemed like something that needed to be fixed. Unfortunately, I don't know why the business has changed.
Sure.
We were hoping to get the Maker District in place to help people like Jason Gallant from Rappahannock Restorations do small-scale fabrication of the building because it's built for it. This use also kind of fits in that building, but I'm not sure, Renee, the ins and outs.
No, that's fine, and that's kind of where I'm getting at. So that type of envisioning for this area, would that be supported by this zoning change, or would that even prohibit from doing that as well? I think it would. If it was fabrication, I think is what you said, that type of use or the light industrial, I guess, that would still be prohibited
Today.
under CH.
Under CH, yes, sir, and that's the need for a Maker District.
Okay, that's what I'm really trying to understand. That you know, as we work on our big area plan and our goals, we want to see a makers district. But if we're changing the zoning and we're changing it that's contrary to what we envisioned for this space, I don't know that that necessarily is a step in the right direction. You know, for looking at the greater good of the community of what we're looking for that area. And then I have just, I guess, a simple question for the applicant as well. But I can ask it later or now.
Let's just hold that.
Yep.
Keep that thought.
Yep.
Anything else? Yes, Mr. Slominski.
Yeah, I share the concerns, and I guess the verbiage that I heard they may be using the buildings for storage. Boy, I would really like to say, yes, you know, we would like you to use this building for storage. And I have not looked at the building. Is it big enough to put that trailer in? Because I do understand the logistics of, you know, he's got a rotation that he does, and to store it in there, then load the truck up. I assume he would prefer this to load it in the truck, but I share the concern of the unsightliness of the trailer.
I'll have that to the applicant to answer.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Horn.
This will be for the applicant, but I just want to state it. Just curious if the owner or the business had control of both buildings, whether or not the space immediately adjacent to the additional building, right now you have the dumpster park there. It looks like it goes quite a bit deeper, and I'm wondering if it's possible that the trailer could be put into that where it's off the street and backed up, and whether or not that would be a compromise between the two. It looks to me on the aerial that there is kind of a drive that goes back further that was kind of between the two buildings, that it could kind of be tucked in. That might be a possible solution, but I don't know. I don't know if you can pull up an aerial or not.
Can you put the photographs back? No, the
Can you
other,
zoom in?
the other ones. The four photographs that you had. No.
Okay, so you've got in this drawing on the right side of the red box, there's the two dumpsters, and there's kind of a space. I don't know the use between, you know, if there's a way that trailer could be put towards the right rear of that building alongside the building, as opposed to in the front, kind of in the front yard. And so I just would ask the applicant whether or not that's reasonable. I haven't gone out there and like to know, and if so, it might be something that might help get it out of the street and not affect his operation as much.
Okay, so I've heard two questions, so Mr. Rodriguez, go ahead and ask your question. That'll be three questions for the applicant, so he can at least think about it.
So my question for the applicant, it's my understanding you also lease storage space in the Grigsby building as well. Would that be going away, or would that be, you would still continue to move inventory back and forth between properties across that street?
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Any other questions for staff?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. I know, because everybody else had kind of gotten a question out there, so I didn't want to leave you with yours until, so we're fine.
I
Sir,
had one
Mr.
other
Pace.
question for the staff, and that is about parking. I noticed in the packet that there is going to be a need for parking with this expanded business, but that you're saying that changes in use are exempted from any additional parking. So my question is, where would parking take place?
The applicant has an agreement with Grigsby's to use their parking space.
I see. And I guess I would have a question for the applicant. Would they object to having that agreement made part of the rezoning?
Okay,
Okay.
yes, Mr. Craig.
This is, just want to put a couple things on the table. That's a good question by Mr. Pates. This is a rezoning instead of a special use permit, so the staff can't impose conditions. We cannot impose conditions on it. So you'd be asking for a proffer from the applicant. So I want to make sure that that's kind of what the applicant understands. And the other caveat to that, while we haven't pursued proffers of this, I do think it's an important point. We envision rezoning this area in the near future to a maker zoning district, and we need to figure out what the automobile stuff is going to, uses, how they're going to be handled there, like Mr. Johnson said earlier. By taking in proffers, we do have a vested right and lose our ability to rezone that. And that's one reason why we haven't kind of pushed for a GDP and other kind of things like this on this, because The use expansion is an interesting question, and it's got some issues, but the value of being able to add this to that cohesive maker district kind of, in our mind, was pretty big too. So we want to maintain our ability to do that. That's why we haven't asked for proffers, but you all have asked about stuff like that too, so that's just part of the conversation.
Mr. Page?
Mr. Chairman, well, I think Renee actually raises a very good question, and for myself, I don't think that there's a problem with expanding this use in CH. However, there's a bunch of other properties, like along Princess Anne Street, that are CH, where I think these uses may not be appropriate and may not end up being allowed in the maker district. So I don't know whether that makes any difference to people in considering this application. To me, it really doesn't. I see this site and this location different than a lot of the rest of the maker district. But if it's all rezoned to the maker district, then this expanded use would become non-conforming, wouldn't it?
Well, we've got to decide that, and this is going to be
Right.
one of the critical questions for that zoning district. Probably number one. What do we do about the automobile uses that Mr. Hornung is talking about along the Princess Anne corridor in the Jackson Warehouse District, and in that Lafayette area on the front? Those are the maker districts. And the buildings, the reason why maker uses fit so well is because these buildings are designed like this building, if we go back to the computer, with storage bays, loading bays, and they're designed in a way that you can pull machinery in and out. I mean, they lend themselves to this kind of thing. But they're also good for automotive service. So that's a question we got to grapple with, and we want to preserve our ability to include this building in the maker district and not have a small spot of CH with special rules about it. So that's all I was trying to get on the table, but I do appreciate that dialogue starting
that's a
now,
good
because
point.
I think we will be trying to do this work in the near future over the summer on the maker district.
Mr. Durham?
So I'm reading the applicant's application for zoning map amendment, and in it, they state that they intend to use the structure for indoor automotive repair. And they say, request of little or no impact on adjacent and neighboring properties. The building consists of 3 bays, all of which will be utilized for automotive service. The aforementioned automotive services will be performed indoors on the property. And Tire Tread Service intends to not change the scope of business that it currently uses of light automotive repair. Jobs requiring multiple days or weeks will not be performed, causing storage of vehicles. Most jobs are completed the same day or within a 2-day time frame, eliminating the need for vehicle storage. So my question for the applicant and for staff, because staff has posited that the structure would be used for storage of tires that need to be, well, either new tire inventory or tires that need to be taken off premises because they're worn and need to be disposed of. But that's not what the applicant says they're going to use it for. They say they're going to use it for light automotive repair, indoor. So what's the real answer?
Well, so he has the room with the 3 bays, and then he has additional room with the structure beside that. There's more room in there besides the 3 bays that he has to work on.
So you're saying there's more than enough room to do what the applicant has stated here,
Yes, sir.
as well as the,
He can discuss that and further. He knows the building
Okay.
better, but yes, sir.
Okay.
There is room on the site within the structure.
yep, we're about to right now, unless there's other questions for the staff. Okay, if there are no more questions for the staff, I understand the applicant is here this evening. Please state your name and address.
Yes, sir. Christopher Glenn Barnett, 6914 Governor's Grant Lane in Fredericksburg. I'm petitioning to expand the use of my business. Currently, we're at a means of not having enough bay space, and that's strictly what it is. If I take in a job that takes 3 to 4 hours, then I cannot perform the quick 30-minute maintenance of an oil change for someone. With these additional bays, my whole focus was to move more of those 3, 4, and 5-hour jobs over to the other building, and then keep the bays that I currently have as the quicker turnaround jobs of oil changes, alignments, things like that. As far as the tire storage, that trail has been there for 18 years, and I never knew I was in violation of anything. I've never received anything from the city about it. So it's not like a willing, thumbing my nose and then saying, I'm hereby, not listening to anything you say. I was not made aware of it. I have presently, in the past, I have used the Grigsby's a lot. Brian and I work very closely together. He's allowed me to keep a trailer over there for storage. So that is within a fenced-in area, which I think perhaps is going to meet the requirements of this zoning district. I've also talked to Mr. Pitts. He said he is the property owner, and I'm acting as his agent. And he said that there would be possibility of, as you claimed, was it you, Mr. Durham? About
It's okay,
the space to be further back on the property we're requesting rezoning on, to, there's one trailer there now that could be moved and we could push the trailer further back from the street. He already knows that the roll-off, the current tenant, Mr. Pitts has been after the current tenant to remove it, and it hasn't been removed, but he does know that's in violation. And we were originally, this is our 74th year in business. We were originally at the site of the present post office, and we moved up to 311 in 1976.
Commissioners, other questions? Has he answered all the ones that, I know there were about 4 questions on the table. I think you got to. Go ahead. All right, Mr. Hornick.
This one's a little difficult because the idea that I had said about possibly clearing the space so you could put that trailer in, that is on the subject property, but the one where it currently is not. So that's not subject to this rezoning. So we understand that it's not something that is part of the zoning we could necessarily put any restrictions on. But I would ask you going forward if you would be willing to do that to try to see if we could at least push it back a little bit so it's not right up on the street. I mean, I'm supportive of your business, and it's great you've been here so long, and we want to see it grow. But at the same time, we're looking at this Makers District and trying to see it evolve into something else. I think that's one of the things we would like to sort of try to do is clean up the street frontage as you're coming down, while also understanding you got to operate a business, and that's integral to it.
That's the one question I would have for staff. Am I correct that across the street at Grigsby's, it would be permitted use inside that inside that fenced-in area for the storage of the trailer?
Well, we need to talk a little bit more with you about that, Chris. Our understanding was that you had a trailer that maybe wasn't the same trailer that you filled up and took off the site.
It is. It's every 2.5 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
It's filled with 800 to 900
So
tons.
we thought it was just a vehicle kind of moving around. If
I mean,
it is a permanent storage thing, then
It is not a permanent storage. It is every 2.5 to 3 weeks. It is removed and another one replaced.
well, we can talk through how best to locate that vehicle. But the other stuff on your site, you do know you need to clean up the tires and all the junk. And okay.
Yes, we talked. That's my present situation is that I'm somewhat limited in space. So, but I told them today when we were discussing this that it's not that many truck tires that would be easily contained inside the structure, the new structure. And I could even find means in my current warehousing and maybe move something else over there if I had to. It's not that many tires that are truck tires. And they're picked up every 1.5 to 2 weeks by different means because just different companies do it.
Mr. Pates.
Yes, I mean, as I said earlier, I'm supportive of your business, glad to see you expanding. But I am concerned about outdoor storage of any type on anybody's property. And I'm not surprised that you haven't heard from the city for all these years. It probably just hasn't been on people's radar. But between your new building and another lot or another site with Grigsby, do you think that you can assure us that that trailer is going to go from where it is now?
Yes, I could definitely either to the present, what we discussed with the new site, but I know Brian has let me in the past, that is Mr. Palmer that owns Grigsby. I've been allowed to do that in the past. Like I said, we work very closely together, and that's why he signed allowing me to park present vehicles. Mainly what parks there is my employees. I have 17 employees, and so that, 17 cars that come in every morning.
You have 17 employees?
Yes, sir.
My goodness, that's a lot. Well, if you're able to make that assurances, I'm all for you and be happy to support the application.
Mr. Durham.
Yeah, do you intend to hire as a result of this expansion?
Right now, I'm not planning on hiring. right now, I have an inefficient allocation of my resources, basically, because I get a lot of redundancy, and several people working on one car, whereas with the expanded bays, more ability to better use the employees that I currently have.
Okay.
But, I mean, with 3 more bays, that potential is definitely there. My business grew 13% last year, so, year over year.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, sir, this is a public hearing?
I have one other thing.
Yes, sir, Mr. Durham.
The only thing I would say, first of all, I'm generally in favor of fixing what I consider to be arbitrary past decisions to zone structures that are clearly inappropriate for the zoning. So we have a building that was built to be a service center that is zone CT, and doesn't allow it to be used as a service center, even though it's been used as a service center for much of the last couple of decades. So this is all very silly to me that we have non-conforming uses for a property that is built to do that particular use. So in general, I'm in favor of this rezoning because it returns this building to a zoning district that allows it to, perform in its intended manner. Only one concern that I have is the, right now the current use, and I know that is tenant based. The building is in great shape. It looks great, and
that would be a credit to Mr. Pitts.
Absolutely.
That was last year. Last year, he spent 2 weeks and really cleaned the building up.
So, automotive repair is an intense use. It makes things not look great, right? And this is because it is currently commercial. Commercial transitional zoning. This does border on residential properties, and so I'm just concerned a little bit about the ability for your business to maintain the property in semblance of order. I know it's going to be it's continued to be owned by Mr. Pitts, and he's got an interest in keeping it in good working condition because you'll be his tenant, and he may have future tenants depending on things. But just wondering if you could talk to how you're going to maintain it looking as good as it does now, given the intended use.
Well, I know this goes well back to my existing character structure of my warehouse. That building was a bottling plant in the 50s, I think, and it went through several uses. There was some machinery in there when we purchased it in 1976, my family. And we had a big problem with a roof leaking, and we spent a lot of money to add the second floor with a nice roof. If you look at our warehouse looks much better than the building that was there, I would say. We did that 22 years ago. So, in keeping in character, and I got a lot of compliments. The owner at the time, Mary Washington Flores, that was driving down the street one day, pulled in and said, "I want to compliment you on how much better the building looks now that you've done what you've done." So, I'm always striving. My predecessors, I should say, speaking of family, were not always, my grandfather, that was not always his big thing, was getting things done and not always being as clean. I guess that VMI spirit in me makes me want to keep things a little cleaner and more of an orderly fashion. So it would not be a problem going forward.
Any other questions? Okay. This is a public hearing. Thank you, sir. So I'll open it up to anyone else that has any comments, wants to make a statement about this particular topic. Seeing no motion, hearing nothing. All right, that closes the public hearing. Okay, at this time, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the RZ 2019-02 at 1317 Bridgewater Street to rezone for commercial office, transitional to commercial highway at that location.
Have a motion, can you get a second?
I'll second that with a comment that I have after some discussion. So-
Okay, at this time, I have a motion and a second, discussion.
I had some comments that I wanted to make, just in general. One of the things I've been really supportive of is the Makers District, and I really want it to succeed in this area. And, my own opinion and philosophy is that businesses like this are things that can be anchors to this community, that can bring business, bring people to experience that side of town that may not get as much action, if you will. And I've been in their store. I've worked with their employees before. I found them always to be professional. Their shop inside has always been clean. I grew up in West Texas, and tires outside it just comes with the territory. But I get it. I get the point. But I've always found them to be professional and willing and wanting to. And even I've had conversations, not about this, but in the past, about Makers District. And, and they're like, oh, we want to know about it. And they want to be informed. And so I think this is a step in the right direction, that we can find buildings and facilities that we can continue to use them, continue to revive them, to make them look good, to make them stand out in the community. And so I do think this is a step in the right direction, and I look forward to helping and partner and looking for input in that neighborhood where you are heavily invested, as being invested in Fredericksburg for the last, what did you say,
74 years.
74 years. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Hornick.
We can't impose conditions as part of zoning, but I would ask the applicant if he'd be willing to proffer or condition on condition this rezoning, or as he goes forward with the planning commission, with the board of supervisors, they would include provisions to provide.
It's not a board of supervisors.
It's been a long day, I apologize. That you would make provisions for the storage of the trailer either across the street or adjacent or between the two buildings, so that it was at least not in the front yard. I think that would go a long way towards Mr. Rodriguez's kind of thoughts on the Makers District and what we'd like to see done there. And I would.
You realize, Mr. Honung, that if he makes that as a proffer, then we can't put it in the Maker District, because then it's a proffered property, and it becomes then, we cannot initiate a rezoning. He would have to then initiate the rezoning to the Maker District.
But the Makers District is an overlay, not a.
No, it's a zoning, it would be a zoning district. It would be a zoning district.
We'd have to do what we were doing earlier, CSC and CH.
So how about if we rely on that VMI spirit, to, kind of move this around, to give us a little bit more, look on Main Street there. How about that?
So the only way to not, no proffers can be proposed by the applicant as part of it.
You can, but legally, when a property is proffered, and maybe I'm stepping on Mike's song here, then he can initiate the rezoning. We could not go through and apply Maker zoning on his property.
Well, what we can do is enforce our current standards, and I think we've been pretty clear about what needs per the ordinance to be cleaned up. The thoughts about the trailer, you're right on, Chris, and Mr. Horner. Usually we would negotiate this type of proffer for this thing, but having that tiny spot, what is it, James, like a third of an acre of CH zoning with special conditions outside of our broader Maker district is problematic. It would be a weird spot that wouldn't be part of the whole, and that's very valuable to us. So I do understand what you're saying, though.
Mr. Bates?
I don't see this as a problem, because I don't see this property necessarily becoming part of the Maker District. Why wouldn't it just stay?
Because that was the policy that was adopted, Mr. Pates, is that the land would all shown in the plan would be placed in the Maker District.
Well, that's just a general guideline for development. That doesn't bind anybody.
That's an
We would not
adopted
have to
policy.
keep this in the Maker District. That's absolutely not right. So I don't see this as a problem.
Okay. think we probably need to,
You got a motion and a second.
I do. How about everybody vote, please?
So, just so we're clear, just Mr. Rodriguez's motion.
Correct.
That is correct.
No amendments.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, item number 5, no old business. Moving on to item number 6, new business. And this evening, we welcome Ms. Jett back to talk about capital
He's coming down
improvement.
the stairs now. She'll
Capital
be joining
improvement
us.
plan.
Will be a brief presentation
Okay.
of the city manager's budget, specifically related to the CIP process. The commission has scheduled a public hearing for comments and further discussion in 2 weeks. So we are looking at this as sort of just bringing you up to speed and answering any initial questions, and then a further discussion and then a motion or action statement from you all, hopefully at your meeting on the 27th.
Good evening, Ms. Jett.
Thank you for inviting me back. As you know, yesterday, the city manager presented the 2020 budget to city council, and the entire budget's available on the website. I would recommend reading the transmittal letter. It's a very good summary of the overall budget and gives quite a bit of information about what the intentions of this budget are. But tonight I'm here at your request to transmit the CIP. I wanted to point out a couple of important dates that are coming up. On Tuesday, April 2nd, the City Council will hold a work session on the CIP and debt. That's kind of an off Tuesday. It's normally not a council meeting, but there will be a special work session for that topic. And then on April 16th, there will be the public hearing on the entire budget.
So, on April 2nd, will that be here in council? Or will it be
I think
upstairs?
It's currently scheduled to be in the suite conference room on the second floor.
Okay.
However, that could change, and if there's a lot of interest, it will be here. If you are interested what the other work sessions topics are, that is posted on the website as
Okay.
well, and we'll be talking about the CIP on the 2nd, schools on the 9th, and water sewer on the work session of the 16th, which is right before the budget public hearing. The first reading of the budget resolution will be on April 23rd, and the second reading is on April 14th. I do want to point out that May 14th. May 15th is the deadline for passing the school budget, so I think we'll be sticking to that schedule. So you have before you 3 items. First was the transmittal letter. Second, we have our budget at a glance, which gives you kind of a high-level overview of what's in the city manager's recommended budget. And then third, I have for all of you in these recycled binders, the city manager's recommended capital improvement plan. FY20, we will fund. FY21 through 25 are merely a plan, but a good plan. So the FY20 budget, I'm looking at page 15 of the document before you, gives you an overview of what's in the CIP. And that includes 15 million of 15 million of projects funded by the general government in 2020. That includes and the overall budget, the overall CIP 2020 through 2025 is 127 million. We also have an additional 75 million of that 6-year period for water, and we have an additional 20 million for sewer. So the total CIP is about $147 million. I'd like to hit some of the highlights in the CIP. We have recommended Gateway Boulevard. Gateway Boulevard is a project that consists of the construction of a road between State Route 3 North and Cowan Boulevard, and it's roughly parallel to I-95. The construction of Gateway Boulevard opens up property for economic development, and it's a key component of the city's package to attract a Veterans Affairs clinic. The project will be debt financed and has $2.5 million in engineering and design funds beginning in FY 2020. However, I want to point out that the city is aggressively pursuing alternative funding sources for this project. And this project will not be constructed if major economic development partners are not available to assist in the payment of debt service. Another project that we have, which is new in this CIP, is the rehabilitation of pedestrian bridges. These are bridges along our trails. There's 4 pedestrian bridges along the Rappahannock Canal Path and the Quarry Bridge. The plan includes some engineering and design work for 2020. However, the replacements will happen in the outer years, and it's estimated at $1,099,000. We also have the construction of a new cell at the R Board. The city and the Stafford County are a partner for the R Board, and this would be $2.5 million to construct cell F3. These are actually revenue bonds that are paid for by revenue from the R Board, although the city issues the debt. The other 2 really big projects are the Mott Run expansion. And the county, this is with Spotsylvania County. The city and the county jointly own the Mott's Run treatment plant, and the city has responsibility for the capital upgrades at the plant. The county is planning to expand the facility, and the 2020 budget includes $491,300. That exact amount was provided by Spotsylvania County for the city share of the cost of upgrades to Mott's Run treatment plant. There's another $10 million included for the remainder of the planning period for those renovations. In addition, the city can purchase an additional capacity at the plant for $2.5 million beginning in 2021. The other rather large project in the CIP is the wastewater treatment plant. This plant, which you've had a presentation on last year from Mr. Fawcett regarding the consolidation of sewage treatment from the city's plant, the FMC plant, and all of that moving to Massaponax. Again, we still need to negotiate with Spotsylvania County regarding this project, but it's currently estimated at $64,639,000. That includes the expansion of Massaponax, rebuilding the influent pump station, transmission improvements, decommissioning the city plant, and then some interim changes at the FMC plant. All of this is included in our debt management plan, and that's discussed on this in the CIP sheets as well as the debt management section of the budget. I wanted to just briefly highlight what we have for the various funds. For the school capital fund, we have about this is over the 6-year planning period, $5.3 million. This is for buses and maintenance type improvements. Additionally, we have $11,900,000 scheduled for school bond funded capital improvements. And this is basically 2 projects, the expansion of an elementary school and the expansion of the high school. In the public works capital, we have estimated $73.5 million in various capital improvements. And again, that does include Gateway Boulevard as well as the pedestrian bridges. It also includes $10 million for the construction of Pond D, which I will get into in just a minute. because that is one managed by the planning department. For public facilities, we have an additional 13.5 million planned. And then for public safety, we have 22.5 million planned. That again includes the new fire station, and new this year, some upgrades proposed at fire station number 1. And then court capital is very modest at 519, which would be the second court room in the courthouse. You can see our various funding sources are also listed on page 15, how we'll pay for, this is the general government portion of the CIP. The water and sewer CIP would require us to issue $76 million of debt, and the general obligation CIP would be $68 million of debt. However, I do want to point out that we are actively pursuing for additional alternative funding sources for Gateway Boulevard. There are 2 planning projects in the CIP, the small area plans, which we've discussed earlier, as well as Pond D. And the small area plans, if you want to look at these now, or we can discuss them later, or I will be happy to discuss them when I come back at your next meeting, or Mr. Johnston can discuss them. They are listed in the table of contents, and you can read them. The Pond D is on page 39 of the CIP, and the planning area updates are on page 55. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the CIP, or I can answer those next week.
Mr. Durham.
So, can we talk about school capital, bond-funded capital?
Yes.
The 2 large projects that you discussed, the Lafayette expansion and the high school expansion,
Yes.
at $5.6 and $5.3 million each. Can you talk to us and explain to us the process by which city staff reviewed school division homework on this subject, on enrollment projections, and their determination that expansion of these 2 existing schools would be sufficient over the course of this time frame to handle expected school enrollment increases and the overcrowding that exists right now, and that these 2 projects should be sufficient to handle that, vice having to have a more expensive new construction start. If you could talk about your review of their work.
I would ask that you invite Mr. Whitley here at some other point, but I do want to point out that on March 20th, there will be a special meeting here in Chambers to discuss how the enrollment projections, there'll be a presentation by Mosley Architects who did the enrollment projections, and there'll be a give and take between the public, Mosley, and staff. I can tell you that these recommendations by the city manager were made by looking at the school enrollment projections as well as our capacity to issue debt. So those were the factors that came into play, but I'm happy to invite Mr. Whitley, who is our assistant city manager, to give you more information about that process. And you're also welcome to come on the 20th to or follow up afterwards about what's discussed at that meeting regarding enrollment projections.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I had a couple questions. I'll just piggyback off of the school question. Does that amount that they call for the expansion, is that just classrooms, or does that actually do any improvements to like the safety concerns? I know that like at Lafayette Elementary, traffic congestion, parking, bus loading zones, those are significant safety issues.
There are improvements to the parking areas that are included in this plan, And the school was designed for an expansion, as well as the high school being designed for an expansion. So these expansion plans fit within the original design of the buildings.
Okay. And then I guess I had a couple questions of stuff that I didn't see in here.
Okay.
I didn't see anything in there about the Renwick building, any type of maintenance or planned, for that. I know that's a building that is sorely in need of
There was,
resolution, but there's nothing in the capital improvement plan.
yeah, there was recently a presentation at a work session, I believe it was last month, regarding the Renwick building and some potential uses for that. But no, there is nothing that the city has in the CIP currently for the Renwick building. A few
Okay.
years ago, we did fund,
Yeah, it's like 25,000 or something.
no, I believe it was 250,000. We did fund, provide funds for maintenance and study of the Renwick, and whatever remains of that is carried forward from year to year for emergency improvements or additional study.
I can add briefly that, Mr. Rodriguez, at that work session, what council is going to be asked to do is authorize potentially an RFI, request for interest, or an RFP, request for proposal. I'm not certain they've got the process quite ironed out yet, to seek private developer interest in the property. I think the goal is to maintain city ownership of the building, but to seek private developer redevelopment interest and financing for the project of some appropriate use. And just to reiterate, maintaining city ownership of the building. So I think at this point, the city is not looking at investing any its money into the project until we determine whether that, in fact, there is any private interest, and to the extent that they're willing, how much they're willing to sort of participate.
Okay. And then my last,
Right,
I'm sorry.
You got one more, please, Mr. Rodriguez.
No, I was just wondering, we've had several presentations with Street Sense, and there's talk about, like the lighthouses and things like that being stuff, and maybe some of the more of the riverfront trails being connected. Are there any capital improvements?
The cycle for that would be in the future, that until
Well, that's why it's a 5-year plan.
Right, and at this point, we're only funding the first year, and
Right.
so that's why it's not in the current year, and we do not have an adopted downtown plan yet, and so until that plan is presented and then reviewed and then modified or morphed into then a comprehensive plan amendment, and then that is adopted, then that is then followed up with then CIP-related items. So the earliest I could expect would be planning staff sitting with Deidre in the preparation in the next cycle in November of this year for the 2021 CIP process of plugging that into to a time schedule for them.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Hornick.
I do want to point out that we do currently have some funds in FY20 and some funds in FY21 totaling 70,000 for pathway improvements. These are for the Idlewild Connector and the Embry Dam Trail. So, as Mr. Johnston said, in the future, once the pathway plan is adopted, it would likely show up in this area of the CIP, but that is something that will happen in the future.
Thank you.
Mr. Hornick.
On the Gateway Boulevard extension, we've got $2.5 million earmarked for 2020. Is that money only anticipated being spent if the city is the successful location for the VA hospital, or is the city planning on moving forward with design plans without it?
We're not going to be spending any significant monies without some development opportunity on that side. The VA is the number one choice. There might be something else that comes along. We can't say. So, but we're not moving forward with that money until we have some sort of fish on the hook, so to speak.
Okay, because when we heard that case, I think one of my concerns was the city's investment in that roadway, and that really, if it were any normal economic development project, we'd expect that developer to pay for that road. Being the VA, I think there was an incentive as an employment center that this was something we would do towards that, and I don't like the idea of having money potentially earmarked floating out there for another development opportunity without that coming back kind of through a process to see whether or not it's something the city wants to do that. I assume that would happen at the city council level, or how would that, if this money was potentially in the CIP and someone came in with a proposal to build something different, would that come back to this group, or would it go to the city council to decide whether or not to earmark and use that money for
If
design?
the use was substantially different than what was approved earlier in terms of zoning and general development plan, then yes, it would be coming back to the planning commission, but I can't say, we don't know what we don't know in terms of what that other use might be. Definitely council is going to be involved in this at any stage in the process, but if it's substantially the same kind of use, then it would be substantially the same use. If it's not the VA, but it's, I don't know, Mayo Clinic doing a large clinic facility, then it probably wouldn't be coming back to you all. But if it is substantially different, then likely it would.
But is the city under any legal obligation as it currently stands with the property owner to spend any of this money on anything other than if the VA clinic came along? This is just putting it in there in case that opportunity presents itself. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, thank you.
Since this is identified as debt financed, we would have to have a public hearing before we
Okay.
could issue these bonds.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Pates?
Yeah, I just had one small question, and that is on page 76 about the train station. I noticed that we have in here estimated cost for repairing the sidewalk and the rail station conduit in 20 and 21, a total of $305,000. Aren't these repairs due to a problem on CSX property, not city property?
We are actively looking into getting this funded. However, there are certain things that have to be repaired for health and safety reasons. So,
Well, is the city looking to CSX or somebody else
yes.
to pay for
oh
this?
yes, the sidewalks are our
No, I
responsibility though.
understand that.
But
But
yes, we are.
well, I wish you luck on that, because years ago, when I was city attorney, we once had so many problems with CSX keeping up their property that we mailed them a chunk of concrete that fell off of the bridge in hopes that might get their attention. But what it did was they ended up getting, I think, the state or the federal government to pony up the money for their repairs. So I would hope that we wouldn't have to foot that bill. Thank you.
So just so we're clear, having walked underneath those tracks many times and try to avoid all the standing water, that's CSX responsibility, right? This project is
No, the sidewalks are our responsibility.
underneath the tracks. So all of that standing water and all that, that's our problem.
I couldn't answer that specifically. But
It's our problem and their fault. That's what it is.
I can get you an answer for that.
So, any other questions?
Yeah,
Yeah, Mr. O'Toole?
yeah, maybe it's not a fair question to ask you, but from a planning standpoint, looking at all these numbers here in front of us, and it appears that for 2020, the tax rate's going to go up 3 cents and a penny for the stormwater to handle the whole thing. What would be the impact if all these were initiated in the years specified? Would this raise the tax rate substantially, or is that
It will have a big impact on the water and sewer rates. We have in the recommended budget an increase of about 10%. That's our estimated. We're currently going through a water and sewer study, and we'll have those results very soon. But we're looking at substantial water and sewer increases over the next few years to pay for the water and sewer debt. On the general government side, what the ultimate the bonds that we have for 2020 will likely not be issued until 2021 with Gateway Boulevard and Pond D, although that's 2021. We have that as funded from the state 50% and from us 50%. So it really depends on whether that's going to come to fruition, and we'll have a better idea then. But this will be discussed at the work sessions when we talk about debt and the CIP on the 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
And the transmittal letter also gives some details on what our debt burden would be if we issued the debt through 2023.
But you say
There will
that
be substantial increases in water and sewer with this plan.
when you
On
say
the general government side, it's more manageable.
this will be on the present customers and also on connection fees, et cetera, or this is just going to be on the
As
users?
part of the water and sewer study, they do look at availability fees, and they'll make our consultant will make a recommendation regarding whether or not those are adequate. While the study findings are not ready yet, I don't anticipate that there'll be a recommendation to change our availability fees. There will be recommendations to change our user rates.
When you say substantial, that's something I don't quite understand. I mean,
Well,
are you
think
talking about,
10%?
I mean, substantial
We're
king? yeah.
including 10% in the 2020 budget. And again, I don't know the exact results of the study. We should have that in the next couple of weeks. But it could be several years of 9%, 10%.
Because King George pays an awful lot of money for water. Some are paying $600 a month. And I wondered, are we getting into that same type of?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Our water rates compared to our peers we compare very favorably. And I can have that information when I come for the public hearing about how we compare to our peers. I'm not sure the information on the final recommendations in the rate study will be available, but we are looking at 9 to 10% increases in the next 3 to 5 years per year.
Because over 7 years, that would double your rate.
Sure would.
Welcome to Fredericksburg. Okay, thank you.
That's, a lot of this is dealing with the consolidation as well as the expansion. So these are decisions that City Council will have to really look at.
So I just have a couple questions. So there seems to be fluctuations in 21 and 22. What is causing that? Like I'm looking at
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So as I look at last year's and I'm looking at the out years, and I'm looking at, and I'll just give you an example here. So I'm looking at public safety, and last year when you look at 21, we were in at 8 million there. No, hold on, let me make sure I'm looking at the right ones. Yeah, correct. So we were at about 8 million, and now when I look at public safety, basically I'm looking at, for 21, we kind of dropped down to about 3 million. But then when I look at 22 for public safety, I've got 1 million in the new plan. And the old plan had us, it kind of flipped the numbers. The numbers flipped. Do you understand what I'm saying now?
Yes, I do. So each year we look at the plan and the departments evaluate what their needs are and look at the timing of projects. And what happened in public safety are, I don't exactly remember what the new station was scheduled, but it's currently scheduled for FY22 now. Okay. However, we did add the renovation of Fire Station 1. And That's estimated to be 3.2 million, 3 million occurring in FY '22, as well as we added a small project for concrete repair at Fire Station 2. So since we added a new project and we reevaluated the needs for the new fire station, that impacts where projects are placed on the plan. The plan has to be flexible, and every year we look at this and spend a lot of time figuring out when and what we can afford every year, and that's why it changed.
So in saying that, which is interesting, looking at this sheet right here.
Yes,
So when I look at advancing the city council priorities,
yes.
and I know this is a 5-year plan, and I will admit I haven't had a whole lot of time to kind of go through it, which I'll probably do over the weekend, I hope. I'm just trying to understand where the priorities come in based upon the 15.9 million that's being spent. And when you talk to some of your highlights, I see the pedestrian bridge replacement plan in there, which I'm gonna kind of equate that to either small area plans or, but I don't see trails in the priorities. Okay, so I'm just trying to, I mean, I would imagine these priorities go for the length of the CIP.
Yes, they do, but
And I understand it's a 5-year plan, I got that part. I'm just trying to see how this all balances out with meeting these right here in the 5-year period, and how you bucket it year to year.
if you're specifically asking about the pedestrian bridges, I think a year ago or within the past 12 months, we looked at the bridges and we instituted a plan where we're evaluating the bridges just like we evaluate VDOT bridges. And based on that evaluation, these bridges are now getting to be 15, 20 years old. It's now time to program them for major rehab. So council priority is cultural vibrancy,
Building community through cultural vibrancy.
as well as distinct and linked neighborhoods, as well as public service, the backbone of our community. So this is taking care of our existing assets, but when they're assets this big, it's often quite expensive to rehab these bridges. So I think it does reflect council's priority.
But are these priorities that are on here, they're subsets of the overall plan? Because you do have priorities there, the middle column at the bottom?
Sure, these are priorities that the city manager or projects that he wanted to highlight that are being funded through the budget process that advance not only the vision of council, but as well as priorities. I don't know off the top of my head which council priority. I believe there's, how many, 60, 42? How many council priorities? 32. I'm sorry, 32 council priorities. I could possibly tie them in for you, but they are.
Okay, all right, no, just trying to understand, when you start looking at the consistency of the expenditures and how we get to, like you said, the council's priorities, especially into the new plan. So,
Yes. But, I mean, in that specific example, that's just maintaining an existing asset.
Right.
It's just expensive to maintain.
yeah. Okay, any other questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Jett, as always.
You're welcome. And if you have any questions that you know of ahead of time that I could be prepared to answer, please submit those to Mr. Johnson and I'll get you the information you need.
Much appreciated.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, moving on, any general public comments? Seeing no movement, seeing a shaking of the heads. Okay, thank you very much. Other business, so Area 7 downtown plan update. First, I want to thank Mr. Duro and Mr. Rodriguez for attending the, and Mr. Pates, that session. I feel bad that I couldn't get there, but I'm going to try to make them as much as possible. But I just want to thank you gentlemen for, taking your time there. Okay, staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can have a computer.
Was this about the Area 7 plan?
Yes, sir, it is.
Oh, sorry.
Area 7 plan.
So I'm not going to give the full Street Sense presentation. We had a good meeting, March 5th. By our count, it was 85 folks that showed up, not including Street Sense and the staff. Just shows the level of engagement, and I want to reiterate something about that. We really did invest. The contract that we signed with Street Sense was heavy on public engagement. I think we're bearing fruit on that. This is actually updated. It's got some of the Street Sense slides in them. I took out a lot of the stuff. I'm going to go through it quick. It's 9:30. But it's going to have more detail and also still remain at a high level. So interrupt me, ask any questions you guys want. And this will just give you a sense for the step that we're in now, which is for finalizing the report. If you have seen this presentation before, which you have. You guys are fairly familiar with Area 7, but for anybody watching it, the boundaries are the river, the canal, the college, Marie's Heights, Hazel Run. It is the downtown and surrounding neighborhoods. The Street Sense went into these two a little bit more. There are two sets of data that were developed by our consultant in addition to public outreach, and I want to make sure that I mention them now. The market analysis is what you see on the left. There's also a transportation system fact book, which we haven't talked a whole lot about with you all yet. And what that did was analyze not only our road network, but our trail system and our transit system, and identified what issues those systems have and how to get better connectivity. So that's another resource that was developed by Street Sense that is feeding this area plan. And we really should take some time to go through that with you guys. It's a tool that hasn't been put on the table quite yet. We are in step 4. Street Sense's report or presentation went through analysis, went through the charrette. You guys have kind of seen that. I think we did that presentation with you all too. And they went through reporting. Right now, we're at about our last comment stage with Street Sense on the report. We should get about the penultimate draft. It's going to be a report. It's not going to be the comprehensive plan policies. And so my presentation to you all right now, I'm going to show you what you'll get in the report, and then the additional work that we're going to do as we change those to comprehensive plan policies for us to discuss as we bring them forward, as we did with 3 and 6. Now that we're getting on a roll with these plans, so this is the transect map. There are some of the same concepts. The T3, all about neighborhood protection. We've got a great stand of existing neighborhoods. T4 on our corridors, we have some apartment use here, some townhomes, all in the T4. Those are also kind of come around here, around Amelia Street on the north side of William, and down along our commercial areas here along Lafayette. So that's all a T4, as well as a pocket here, this area between the downtown and the Wolf-Jackson area, which is a proposed maker district. And then here is the extension of the Canal Corridor Maker District down Princess Anne Street. So what does that mean? That's going to be in the report, and we'll work together to finalize that as a comp plan analysis. That's going to be our future land use map. But we are going to look at additional tools with each of these transects. So I did want to mention this to you guys. This was not part of Street Sense's report, to let you know what's going on, to hopefully put these thoughts into your head so we can be thinking about them together as we go forward. There's a mismatch between historic development patterns and current zoning regulations. That's something we're always trying to address with these area plans. I think the biggest one, we have a density-based system in our downtown where we have existing buildings that have 12 units. It's the latitudes over here. That's 100 and something units an acre just because of the form of the neighborhood. Well, we only permit 36 units an acre. Density-based rules don't particularly work well in the downtown. We end up getting special exceptions for things that should be a general special use permit. So that's one example of the mismatch that we want to address, because so that's one thing. But that's not the only mismatch that we'll be looking at. Preservation of historic resources. So we'll be talking about adaptive reuse of buildings, evolving the corridor design guidelines to be more clear and efficient. As a form-based code, currently it's a zoning and then an overlay that completely contradict each other. We want to make it all one. there's a duplicative process that's pretty onerous for anybody to go through. You have to get one approval, and then surprise, you get another approval. So we want to make that more efficient for folks, and also make sure that the two codes actually combine into one, so that it is catching all the things it's supposed to catch, and actually respecting the historical pattern better than our codes do now. Though good step in the right direction when they were adopted. Expanding the National Register district, not necessarily the local district, so there's more ARB control, but the National Register district itself enables more property owners to apply for federal and state tax incentives. So that's part of the plan that we're looking at. This is a concept from Area 6 with neighborhood support and initiation, investigate conservation districts, character districts for neighborhoods, or pattern books as appropriate. That would be continued in this plan. And then focusing on historic property maintenance enforcement. All of these tools and this first thing about the mismatch between the historic development pattern and current zoning regulations all feed into something called demolition by neglect. So a lot of these land use regulations, especially in the T5, let me show you that one. I don't think I even talked about it. This is the core of the city. This is the core of the plan. It's our real gem. So all of this stuff is about how to upgrade this area and protect its character. Finally, we're going to address parking issues. I know that Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Pates have brought this up, so we certainly have it on the table. The plan is to identify the core parking issues in the downtown, including the change of use. We're going to set out a table that kind of hopefully spells out what all the parking regulations mean currently, and then take that along with some identified issues to the parking committee at their April 1st meeting. The parking committee was set up by the city council to look at on-street parking issues. So they're going to also take this on to look at these issues, review it, make recommendations, and we'll bring them back to you guys. But the meeting is on April 1st, so you guys can attend that if you would like. And finally, we'll include all those recommendations, hopefully, in the final report. Now I'm back. Anybody got? Mr. Rodriguez, do you have something? You got something? All right, okay. This is back to street census presentation. They were highlighting kind of the assets that we have. I won't spend too much time on this. Open space, access and mobility. Housing is another mismatch between zoning and our form. You can't recreate the housing stock that we have with the type of zoning that has been applied to the city, and how do we fix that mismatch so that we don't have non-conforming uses, good uses that are the core of our neighborhoods be deemed non-conforming uses where they're supposed to fall into the ground over time. But one thing that we've talked about is the open space network. There's been a ton of focus on the riverfront. I'm not going to rehash that with you guys now, but what I do want to show you is the other half of the plan. And what you see on this page is what we call the uplands. So everybody's familiar with the beacons Mr. Rodriguez was talking about a minute ago along the river and how we're activating the river. But they've also identified these linear connections throughout downtown. Washington Avenue and Kenmore Park, we basically have the makings of a green belt here. And how to activate that appropriately. A lot of this plan is about making things better lit, safer to walk through, and how does that occur along Washington Avenue and then down through the future Maker District here as one means of connecting all of our great green space together. And this, by the way, this background kind of hazel green here is not an expanded park. It just is a means to illustrate we have a significant chain of open spaces that just need to be better linked. A second concept is this pink arrow here. It's a concept that's in our existing comp plan now. We've made significant capital investment along this area here to Morey Stadium, where we've added bricks and colonial lights. It's called the George Street Walk. Continuing that walk and taking advantage of some of the odd angular areas that are currently dedicated to cars. They're just paved over, where we could convert back to more public space to add in art, to add in other visual interest as people make their way from the downtown to the battlefield, and then down along the battlefield to another wealth of open space that we have along Hazel Run. And that's the third piece. How do we do a trail that works along Hazel Run? Probably not going to be paved. Probably going to be more of a nature trail. So what we're doing is we're going to have this report. What our group is going to be doing, and you'll see it more in another example in a minute, is putting some detail to it that maybe we don't adopt into the plan, but gives us some idea of the capital improvements that we're committing ourselves to in this plan, because this is going to be a capital improvements intensive plan, and how to prioritize that and be fully aware of the money that we're spending. I feel like you guys have seen this. This is riverfront activation. Cool, okay. Access and mobility, one-way, two-way pairs was a big issue at the meeting on the 5th. So that's certainly something that's on the table. I know the neighborhoods are very interested in it as a strategy. This one hasn't been hit on too much, and it's another one that I want to give you some detail on. This is a very interesting page of the report, and I'm going to read this paragraph. One main concern is that very few sidewalks are sufficiently lit for nighttime use outside of the central downtown core. Residents and visitors otherwise inclined to walk will choose driving into downtown at night because they feel safer. Creating a network of lit sidewalks will concentrate pedestrians to the same path, creating safety in numbers, and then they've assigned a priority. So they took a very expansive look at our pedestrian system, and you can see it reflected in this map. We've put a group together to analyze this in order to make it more of an achievable goal. What are we trying to do? Let's group things into a more boiled down categories and focus this capital improvement so that we can get a sense for what we're prioritizing. And this is the direction we're going in. Here is a map of it's a boiled down map. We've got these blue lines that are pedestrian corridors. They were identified on the last map, and we all agreed that these are main walking routes into downtown. What we also have are emerging walkable urban places. It's our maker districts. They're areas that maybe people in our next planning cycle will start to want to walk around, not just walk to, but actually be in. I think William Street right now is probably the best example of this with what's happened with Sugar Shack, with Soup and Taco 2. It's an up and coming area, despite the fact that the infrastructure there doesn't lend itself to people being in that space. So that's an opportunity for us to upgrade, but we need to know what that cost is. So that's a whole strategy that we'll have at the end of the plan, but this is, and what you see in these pictures here on the left is where do we invest in this type of full brick sidewalk with this type of street light, and these walkable urban places are something where maybe we want to consider that. The third level shown on this plan is this pink blob here. It's the interface between the riverfront and the downtown. It's currently disconnected. This is something that we've asked the consultant about. How do we better connect that? There's gaps in our brick sidewalk and street lighting network. So we've identified kind of where the gaps are. We need to go through the more detailed process, this is our staff, of looking at these areas and determining whether or not we can light them, whether or not there's utilities overhead that would prevent us from putting colonial street lights and what the problems are, so that we can give you the full gambit. We can say, hey, Hanover Street, not only do you have to do the full brick sidewalk, this section here in this first picture, and this light, but you also have to underground utilities at cost of X. We probably won't get a fully engineered cost, but that's the type of capital improvement planning that we want to bring forward to you. Another consideration with this map, especially along these blue lines, is what is the appropriate level of lighting? The consultant originally proposed just this colonial light on this whole map throughout the city, wherever they propose lighting. It's not realistic. It was an ambitious goal, and maybe in the second planning cycle from now, it may be more achievable, but you all heard Deidre's presentation tonight. So this is one means of lighting. It's Dominion Power Lights. We've had those mapped. We've got that data. We're looking at how to infill. This is the William Street rhythm. That's how they currently exist, and that is a fairly well-lit area. So is that the level of service that we're expecting on a pedestrian corridor? We also have, this is a picture all the way on the right of the Princess Anne corridor. Old Route 1 has a certain type of light, and that is it. So whether or not we need to pick some certain type of light for this, again, we're talking about these blue corridors where we're not going to go to this full intense streetscape here, but we want them to be better lit for people. What level of improvement are we able to propose, and what level of improvement makes sense for the city? That's the level of detail we're trying to get to as we finalize the report. We've talked about housing in our infill strategy. We are very much in an infill upgrade strategy right now. This plan isn't proposing drastic new developments of any kind, but we are looking at what are our opportunities along our corridors, what are the types of housing that we have, and how can we make it so that people can build them again as an infill and upgrade strategy. And what you see on this map is the different colors indicate the different types of housing beyond single-family homes, mixed-use buildings, townhome courts, single-family courts, which is another thing that no one could ever build under modern density, and not only density, but development standard rules that maybe we want to take a look at re-enabling. Finally, we got to these location-specific interventions. This is more classic retail planning. The real theme behind all this is this kind of expansion of walkable urban places. We have the ability to do that, and no one, it's very rare. This is extremely rare, something to be very proud of. Other localities try to create this from scratch, and some are successful. I think Spotsylvania Courthouse Village is doing a pretty good job of creating this type of place from a 30-year small area plan, actually, that they had out there. But it's very hard to do. We have the bones to expand this in certain areas, and there's two kind of levels. First level is you need to be able to walk to it safely. That's kind of where Lafayette Boulevard is. The challenges here are about getting people there and around safely. And then as those improvements occur, maybe with infill and over time, a place can develop there. But the real focus here is on finishing the sidewalk network, creating curbs, creating the ability to cross the street safely. There is currently a crosswalk here, connecting into the trails. So again, it's about people walking to it and safely and efficiently. As we get into the train station district and the Maker district, it's more about how to keep people there when they're walking to it. They can get there fairly safely, but these are our next iterations of our small little downtowns. There are little nodes where people may want to be for some time. So the interesting piece, this is a very interesting diagram, and when we get it to you, you'll want to study it. There's a lot of pieces here. There are empty lots, the cab company and the parking lots by Naders. There's this parking lot here that's come up before the ARB several times, and Pullman's Auto. There's the transportation improvements with the roundabouts that are proposed. The main focus from our end right now is how do we accommodate an expansion here. We own a lot of land. We don't own all the land, and that's what you see here. This is privately owned land, and how do we switch that here to accommodate a future expansion with the third rail, while also maintaining this green space that's very important to the community, adding more green space, because again, that's a priority for the community, potentially adding structured parking. So there's a lot to balance in that area. We're not getting to the level of retail planning on a train station, which I wish we could do. I wish we could get functional speakers. I think.
Can I?
Yeah.
You said I could interrupt, so I'm going to. So, why does the train station district not contemplate inclusion of the parking lot, the VRE parking lot? Why isn't that included in the area? Why, that is an integral part of the train area, parking for the trains. So seems to me you ought to be planning for that.
Let me ask you some questions about that, Mr. Drum. This is an older version, I hope, of this diagram. One thing that we have asked is for the expansion of the platforms to be shown here, so that parking is more accessible from the pedestrian. Get rid of that condition where people cross the streets. What are you asking?
I'm talking about the VRE parking lot that's
Okay.
back
Frederick Street.
down Frederick Street.
And what is its future? What are you envisioning there? Do you have any thoughts on it currently?
Well, you can't get rid of it right now. I mean, the VRE has to have parking,
Okay.
right? So if this a train station district would seemingly include planning around the parking for the train station, and the VRE parking lot is an integral part of the train station, the current train station, and presumably a future train station. So you would seemingly need to plan the whole thing that should be included.
He's just saying it's not in this plan.
Okay, well, and I'm trying to push you a little bit further we want to get as much comment as we can right now. So I'm trying to push you all to think through. You're absolutely right. There's no doubt. What we've got shown here, Mr. Durham, that's Maker Districts. That's Lafayette. Here we go. This is a structured parking facility shown, which would take some of the demand for that surface parking away. So what I'm asking you all to think about is, as that need for massive surface parking lots along the train station is accommodated in a more efficient facility, and we have this land here. That's what I'm saying. What is the future of that land?
Well, I mean, yeah, if you could do a multi-story parking structure there just for, that would essentially replace the VRE lot, that's great. I'm not convinced that you can. I don't know. maybe with the opening of the Spotsylvania train station, it doesn't fill up like it used to, but I guess it probably does. I don't know. I don't use it any longer. I walk to the train station now, so I don't know. But it is, there are massive numbers of cars that fill that lot. I don't think that amount of space where the existing parking lot is, a several deck parking structure isn't going to replace that I don't think it's going to replace that parking lot.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? I know we got several train commuters here.
Well, but I thought his point is that the lots down there along Frederick are not included in this plan.
Yeah,
Right.
that is my point.
I hear you guys on that, and we'll expand.
And I think that's a good point.
I don't think we have any problem
Yeah,
including
we'll
it.
do that.
We were sort of thinking of that sort of very kind of two-dimensional. Yep, it's just going to be a parking structure. But I see what you're saying, and we are putting in the idea that's been floated for a lot about a tunnel underneath the railroad tracks for pedestrian
Right there.
connections. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's good.
I mean, the fact, I absolutely agree with you. The better service for city residents who are walking from their residences to the train station, yeah, absolutely. But it is still going to be the case that people will drive from out of the city or from other parts of the city where they can't walk to the train station to park in the VRE parking lot, or something that replaces it. So.
Yes, sir. The Maker District, we've talked a lot about these designations. Basically, the blue lines are just the main corridors through. A lot of the same issues that we had with Area 6, we're going to work through here as well. So that's basically what you see on the screen here with those. I won't spend a whole lot of time there. And that's basically it. So what we'll get is a final draft of this report.
Can I ask you a question about Maker
Absolutely.
District? Could you go back to that real quick? It seems to me that the health and well-being of Maker Districts requires that the businesses that locate there and the people who live there also have there are other businesses that service them that are there. I just want you to assure me that we're thinking of that you know, whether it's food service or other retail that would that people who would live and work in these Maker Districts could use and would keep them kind of contained and not having to get in their cars and go somewhere.
Oh, absolutely,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. These are inclusive districts. Yes, sir.
I'll just say my question differently, but same issue that I've had. But do you think it's realistic for us to attack or address, I should say, two Maker Districts at the same time? I mean, I was at the meeting, I was suggesting that maybe the Jackson and Wolf Warehouse District might be something future down the road, and that we should take an approach to get this first Maker's Districts, the Canal Corridor, get that one successful to emulate a model that works. And I mean, we're been over a year, I think, in trying to build consensus and getting people engaged to work in that area. And I would hate for us to lose momentum in that, but while we're trying to also support another initiative.
It's a great question, Renee, and I think we've been asked stuff like this all along. The work that's been done on the Canal Corridor and the energy that's developed around it for some type of Main Street organization is very special. And whether or not there's will to do that simultaneously on Lafayette Boulevard is something that will have to happen organically. But the base of these Maker Districts, which is to have the kind of new little centers that aren't the downtown, but permit cafe uses and commercial retail, office, and then also this type of production as a new way to kind of use these buildings. I think we can do that all at once, especially considering there's these uses there already that we would hope to make legal, so they don't have this non-conforming status hanging over their head. So I hope I'm answering your question. And then, you know, in terms of whether an organization will develop, that it does take a lot of energy. I mean, we've been going to these meetings monthly.
Isn't it the case that there already is a Lafayette Corridor group
Yes,
that
sir.
has been pursuing development ideas and that sort of thing? So it seems like you've got the base of another grassroots organization based on something that already exists, that you can form another group to push this forward, some
Could you
coalition
provide us
of
that
owners.
list of who those groups is? Because I've not heard of it.
Yeah, I'll need to look into it. It's it was the Lafayette Business Association that was trying to form. And I'll see what we've got on that. And they had a slogan, which was Shop the Boulevard. I remember that. So let me see what we can dig up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like they've already attempted to organize. So seems like if the city is giving assistance elsewhere, we ought to reach out and see if we can get them some assistance as well.
I just to echo what Mike is saying and to echo what Mr. Durham said several minutes ago, I think it's important, even though it's a lot on the plate to take on, I think it's important to address some basic land use issues that, as Mr. Durham described it earlier, that we have a situation on the other end of town where it's just kind of, as he said, it's kind of silly that you have buildings of one nature with land use regulations that are of completely different nature. And I think we need to right-size the regulations to the built infrastructure. I think that in itself is an important thing to do. And we have a very key property that's now on the market right in the middle of this district. And I think it's important to give the best opportunity for the redevelopment of that site with the kind of regulations that will generate something that will be very positive for the city. So I think it's just simple land use. It would make some sense for us to move forward for those two reasons alone.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you there, Mr. Craig, unless you have anything else.
No, sir. We'll as we get more information, or as the report gets close to being finalized, we'll put stuff on the agenda to talk through, have more discussion on this. Appreciate your time.
All right. Item 8B, Planning Commissioner comments. Mr. Rodriguez.
I just wanted to know what the status of the request that I made at the last Planning Commission meeting for us to have the city attorney be here as part of this functioning body or a representative.
Well, that's been communicated. I think their preference is to be involved on a project-by-project circumstances warrant. I don't think they are in a position where they feel they need to be present at every meeting.
Right. I'm trying to figure out what do we do if we have the city attorney come to every meeting and we don't have
Well,
anything?
tonight we had a question that came up that would have probably been good to have somebody there. And if they're not willing to come, I mean, if we have to have some other legal representative to be here to answer those questions so that we can make decisions and not necessarily delay things. I know we sent something back at the last meeting that probably, in my opinion, didn't need to go back, that we could have addressed and taken care of and kept, the city moving forward. But because we didn't have that opportunity to engage with our city attorney, and it's my understanding that they used to attend these meetings on a regular basis. So I don't know.
Okay.
Infrequently. They did infrequently attend.
Okay, so I guess I'm gonna look at it as something we can continue to take a look at, but I know that there's been numerous sessions where we didn't have a legal aspect, so trying to balance that is probably our challenge. Do we have folks here that's just kind of here for our comfort level, or do we have them here for the utility of what they bring to the conversation? So, I mean, Mr. Pates, you've been...
Well, having been on the other side, I didn't want to attend too many meetings. But on the other hand, I think there's often a real need. And I don't know that it has to be at every meeting, but I think when there are substantive decisions involving legal issues, such as rezonings, I think it would be very good to have a representative from the city attorney's office here, because you can't anticipate what questions are going to arise. I mean, it's very hard to do, but I think certain categories of issues would narrow that down considerably. I mean, if we're just doing planning things, we'll probably not. But decisions like land use decisions, I think it would be a good idea.
Okay, so it kind of goes to the balance, so.
Or changes to ordinances, which
Exactly.
are
Right,
laws.
right.
Which
Laws.
require attorneys
Yeah,
to
yeah.
weigh in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
I'm wondering if we could maybe structure our meetings that if we could front load what we would perceive as maybe possible issues, that they wouldn't have to say at the whole meeting, but
Right.
would be at least made available early on. Just a thought.
Okay. I mean, and I would imagine that there is some discretionary aspects to the city attorney looking at the topics and saying, should there really be a question here or not? Or, I mean, there are some determinations there, depending on what we're talking about.
But I also think as a body for the city of Fredericksburg, we also have a right to have representation and clear understanding. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like,
I mean, that's not universal. I mean, there are lots of commissions and committees that meet all the time, so. But we particularly do deal with issues of law,
right.
so.
I would suggest
Okay.
that maybe our chairman talk with the city attorney. Anyway.
Okay, sir, I'll take that one. Thank you very much. Mr. Pates, you had something?
Yes, I've been thinking for some time about a couple issues that I wanted to raise tonight, even though it's very late, and we're probably not going to go into them tonight, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some things that I hope will be food for thought. And the topic is growth. Two events have happened recently that impact directly the work of this commission and the decisions that we make, including ones that have been made tonight. The first one is this article that appeared recently in the Freelance Star that says Fredericksburg region helps fuel state growth. And that article, it's pretty noteworthy article that some people may not be aware of, but we are one of the fastest growing localities in Virginia. And it includes, and this article includes a picture of all the housetops that are going up in the city. According to this article, only 3 out of 143 cities and counties in Virginia have experienced greater population growth since 2010 than the city of Fredericksburg. Loudoun County, New Kent County, and the city of Falls Church. We are next. This makes us the 4th fastest growing locality in the state, with a growth rate of 16.9% over the past 9 years, pushing the city's population to 28,387. This is a higher growth rate than either Stafford County or Spotsylvania County. The second event is the recent article that was in the paper indicating that the city's public schools are getting so overcrowded that many parents and educators are calling for the construction of a new upper elementary school. City Council, I understand, is understandably reluctant to fund another elementary school because of budget constraints and a desire to avoid higher property taxes. It's interesting, tonight we saw a budget report that suggests that there's going to be a recommended 4-cent real estate tax increase just next year. This dilemma, though, is not surprising. These are never easy choices to make, but I suspect that the city will soon have no choice but to incur new debt to build a new school and expand the others in order to ease overcrowding, and will also have to raise taxes. This is where the Planning Commission comes in. This commission and the City Council, for the past 5 years at least, have approved a number of rezonings and other land use decisions that are encouraging and facilitating massive new residential growth, most of which is bringing new apartments and townhouses to the city and the school children that go with them. While it is much better to be dealing with excessive growth than the problems facing Buchanan County, which has lost 10% of its population in the last 9 years. So, I mean, we have to keep this in context, so it's not the worst thing that could happen. But I believe that we have a responsibility to allow only that new multifamily housing that the city can afford and that pays its own way. The city has virtually abandoned proffers from developers to offset development costs related to those projects, and cities like Fredericksburg have no ability to impose impact fees that are needed to help offset these costs. Even as we speak, hundreds of new apartments are under construction right now at Celebrate Virginia. Also, the Highlander project, which, contrary to a statement that was in the paper the other day, that approval was not a by right approval. The by right site plan or whatever, or subdivision, came on top of a rezoning decision that the city made several years ago. These kinds of approvals for massive new residential development, I believe, must stop. Although I may be in a minority, I will continue to oppose new multifamily projects in the city until we have a way of paying for them. It's time we found a better way, and until that time, our only choice may be to simply say no to intensive new residential development. Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments?
I'd like to respond to Mr. Pates' comment.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Slominski?
Again, your comments are a statement of fact, and appreciate it and appreciate to be reminded. I do think we have the ability, because we are a hub, we are a dense city, a potentially walkable city, that like you're saying, with some forethought, we could grow smartly. And I do think we had a situation here talking about the Westwood shopping centers, and I think we have opportunities to build multifamily areas with shopping, which seems to be, again, when brought up Spotsylvania Courthouse, those types of developments, we are primed for those types of developments, and I would say we should encourage those, but with the thought of, let's make sure they don't hold us, leave us holding the bag financially. But let's also not just, I'm fearful of the comment of, let's stop this growth, but let's just continue to push for wise growth. And I think we'll all benefit from that.
I agree. That's called smart growth. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Slominski. Any other comments, commissioners? Okay, planning director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I guess one observation I would make on Mr. Pates' comments, and I do appreciate his concerns, and I was just talking to Mike here, I don't think we've had an application start a process in the planning staff for a residential project for almost a year. The fact is, we are at a suspension mode. We don't have any new projects coming down the pike. Just FYI, there's no rezonings of anything that you already haven't heard of or seen. So just so you know, there's nothing coming, and there's nothing, no public hearings are coming up on your future calendar events. So we have through the marketplace, or for whatever reasons, just to let you know, there isn't anything more coming right now. I'm on the list of items in the agenda. I appreciate your all's patience as we work through the issue of the minutes that we do owe you to come back before you. I'm sure you all aware that we are been dealing with issues, and we even have a guest minute taker this evening. Thank you for coming, Nancy. We really appreciate your willingness to sort of step in on this. So I appreciate your all's patience. We will get this resolved. Just give us a little time. On March 27th, we will have the public hearing on the CIP. I believe this is the second time the Planning Commission has held a public hearing on the CIP. I believe you did it last year. So this
Third time.
I'm sorry, third time? Third time, okay. So we'll see what kind of comments we have and encourage you all to make comments. Just from a timing standpoint, it would be very helpful if you all could make any positions that you wish to make on the 27th. If we wait to the 10th, then your comments will be going to the council just like the literally hours before, days before they actually have their public hearing and voting. So it'd be more impactful if we could do something on the 27th. Tentatively, the sign ordinance amendments that were discussed a meeting or two ago may come back to you on the 27th. We're still working through the issues with the city attorney's office. That might be on the 27th. It might be in the 10th. We're still working that out. I'm 95% certain that someone from the city attorney's office will be present at that meeting because there are legal issues definitely that we've been discussing with them about that. So they will be present for that item. The item that's on your agenda tentatively for the UDO text amendments, we are putting that off to the 10th. There was another discussion at the ARB level. We thought that we had addressed their concerns, but they're scheduling another work session on what seemed to be rather detailed technical issues, but we want to make sure that they're 100% on board with that. So we're putting off your public hearing on that to the 10th, and so we can assure that what comes before you is reflective completely of the ARB's position on all those amendments. And lastly, something that Dieter didn't get into, but I just want to make clear for everyone in the CIP vis-a-vis the small area planning process, there is a shift. We are extending the small area planning process by a year. We are finding that it's just a whole lot for staff to sort of absorb and process everything that's going forward. So this year, obviously, we're planning on finishing Area 7. Then in 2020, starting this summer, we will be working on Areas 1 and 2. Areas 1 being Central Park and Celebrate west of 95, and Area 2 being the Fall Hill area just across 95 from Area 1. Then in 2021, we would be working on Area 4 and Area 5, Area 4 being around the hospital in Cowan, Area 5 being College Heights. Then in 2022, we'd be working on Areas 8, 9, and 10, Areas 8 being Mayfield, Area 9 being the Industrial Park area, and Area 10 being the South Lafayette, South Route 1 area. So that's how we're sort of spacing that out. We are anticipating different consultant specifically regarding Area 9. Street Census Forte does not include industrial use or reuse, and so we are going to be trying to find someone who can help us on that issue. So I just wanted to make that clear. Also, there's been the ongoing discussion about shifting the one-way, two-way arrangement with Washington and Fall Hill. We just finally signed a contract with an engineer this week to do the detail engineering analysis of that and hope to have that study back by July. So we are moving forward with that. Any other questions?
Any questions?
That answer.
Let's go home.
Or talk to you all later.
Any questions? All right. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
The answer this evening. Thank you very much, all. Oh, wait. You know what? It's funny you say that because it's going to be a spring deal.